Imagine if I told you that the drink in your cup right now has started wars, fueled revolutions, and built empires. Coffee isn't just a beverage, it's been the liquid that's shaped human civilization for over 1,000 years. Hey, I'm Michael and welcome to Hoodie History. It's great to have you here. Today, I'm taking you on the complete journey of coffee, from its legendary discovery by a goat herder in ancient Ethiopia to the climate crisis threatening every cup that you'll drink tomorrow. This isn't just about how we learned to turn berries into one of the world's most valuable agricultural exports. It's about how coffee rewrote global economics, sparked democratic revolutions, and helped to create the modern world as we know it. If you love incredible stories from history, you've come to the right place. Hoodie History is all about bringing the past to life with new videos dropping regularly. If that sounds good to you, hit subscribe and stick around for more fascinating stories from the past. By the end of this video, you'll never look at your morning coffee the same way. So grab your favorite mug and trust me, you'll want the caffeine for this epic journey through history. Let's go. Okay, so our story begins in the highlands of Ethiopia, sometime around the 9th century. And you might have heard the legend about Kaldi, the goat herder who noticed his goats getting unusually energetic after eating certain red berries. But here's the thing, while Kaldi might be a myth, the Ethiopian origin story is absolutely real. Coffee Arabica literally evolved in the forests of Ethiopia. The locals called it buna, and they'd been consuming it for centuries, though not quite how you'd expect. They'd grind the beans with butter to make energy-rich balls for long journeys, or ferment the berries into a wine-like drink. The idea of brewing it with hot water, well, that came later. And here's where the story gets interesting. Ethiopian Orthodox monks started using coffee to stay awake during lengthy prayer sessions. These religious communities became the first coffee houses, in a way, places where people gathered, discussed ideas, and stayed alert through the night. The plant itself was sacred to the Oromo people, who had elaborate coffee ceremonies that could last hours. They'd roast the beans by hand, grind them fresh, and serve the coffee in 3 rounds with specific names: Abol, Tona, and Baraka. This wasn't just drinking coffee, it was a social ritual that brought communities together. So coffee stayed pretty much contained to Ethiopia until the 15th century, when it crossed the Red Sea to Yemen. And this is where coffee's global journey really begins. Sufi mystics in Yemen discovered that coffee was perfect for their religious practices. It kept them awake for night-long prayers and meditation. They called it kahwa, which originally meant wine but was transferred to coffee as it became their preferred drink for spiritual focus. The port city of Mocha became the first major coffee trading hub. Yeah, that Mocha, the one your fancy coffee drink is named after. Yemeni traders were incredibly protective of their new commodity. They'd boil or parch the beans before export to make sure no one else could grow coffee plants. For over a century, Yemen controlled the entire global coffee trade. But a monopoly like that was destined to be broken. According to legend, an Indian pilgrim named Baba Budan smuggled 7 fertile beans out of Yemen by strapping them to his chest, and with them, coffee's journey to the rest of the world truly began. Coffee houses called kahve-khane started popping up across the Ottoman Empire. Istanbul alone had over 600 coffee houses by the 16th century. But these weren't just places to drink coffee, they became centers of political discussion, poetry readings, chess games, and social revolution. And that made the authorities nervous. Ottoman Sultan Murad IV was so worried about coffee houses becoming centers of political dissent that he banned coffee entirely in 1633. The penalty for drinking coffee? Death. I'm not kidding, they'd execute people for having a cup of coffee. Though let's be honest, if you've ever tried to function before your morning coffee, death might seem like a reasonable alternative. Coffee reached Europe through Venetian merchants in the early 1600s, and the reaction was mixed. Some Christians called it Satan's drink because it was associated with Islam. But legend has it that Pope Clement VIII tasted it and declared it too good to leave to the infidels, effectively baptizing coffee for Christian consumption. The first European coffee houses opened in Venice in 1645, but it was London where coffee house culture really exploded. By 1700, London had hundreds of coffee houses, with some estimates reaching over 1,000 at its peak, and they were changing society in ways no one expected. These coffee houses became known as penny universities. For the price of a cup of coffee, you could sit all day, read newspapers, debate politics, and network with merchants, writers, and intellectuals. Lloyd's of London, the famous insurance market, started in Edward Lloyd's coffee house. And the London Stock Exchange grew out of Jonathan's coffee house. But here's my favorite part. Coffee houses were where the Enlightenment happened. Voltaire reportedly drank 40 cups of coffee a day and lived to 83, which either proves coffee's health benefits or that the 18th century had some seriously weak coffee. The French took coffee culture in a different direction. They opened the first café in Paris in 1686, and it became a meeting place for revolutionaries. The French Revolution was literally planned in coffee houses. When you think about it, democracy and coffee are pretty closely linked. Both involve a lot of heated discussion and keeping people awake late into the night. But Europe had a problem. They were importing all their coffee from Yemen, and that was expensive. So they did what Europeans did best in the colonial era. They stole the plants and grew them elsewhere. The Dutch were the first to break Yemen's monopoly. A Dutch merchant smuggled coffee plants to Java and Ceylon in the 1600s. The French have an even more dramatic story. Gabriel de Cleur transported a coffee seedling from the Royal Botanical Gardens in Paris to Martinique in the 1720s. The voyage was so perilous he supposedly fought off pirates, endured storms, and even shared his meager water ration with the tiny plant to keep it alive. From this single seedling, much of the coffee in the Caribbean and Latin America is said to have descended. Then, the British took coffee to Jamaica and the Portuguese brought it to Brazil. And Brazil changed everything. By 1850, Brazil was producing half the world's coffee. The scale was incredible. Brazilian coffee plantations were massive operations that relied entirely on enslaved labor. Coffee didn't just fuel the Industrial Revolution, it was built on the backs of enslaved people who never got to taste the profits of their labor. The human cost of coffee's expansion is something we can't ignore. Millions of Africans were enslaved to work on coffee plantations across the Americas. The wealth that built European cities and funded empires was generated by a commodity literally sweetened with sugar and stained by human suffering. Coffee reached North America in the 1600s, but Americans were still mostly tea drinkers. Then came the Boston Tea Party in 1773, and coffee became a patriotic statement. Drinking coffee instead of tea was a way to reject British rule. By the 1800s, Americans were consuming more coffee per capita than anyone else in the world. The Wild West ran on coffee. Cowboys, gold miners, railroad workers all relied on strong black coffee to fuel their work. Coffee became as American as apple pie, except maybe more so. The Civil War really cemented America's coffee obsession. Soldiers on both sides considered coffee essential to survival. The Union Army's superior supply lines meant better access to coffee, which some historians argue gave them a real tactical advantage. Imagine fighting a war while caffeine deprived. You could argue the Confederates were basically fighting with one hand tied behind their backs. But it was the Industrial Revolution that really transformed coffee consumption. Factory workers needed caffeine to handle long shifts, office workers needed it to stay alert, and suddenly coffee became fuel for the modern economy. The late 1800s brought incredible innovations that changed how we drink coffee forever. In 1884, James Mason invented the coffee percolator. In 1901, Luigi Becerra patented the first espresso machine in Italy. In 1906, George Washington, not that George Washington, but a Belgian inventor with the same name, created the first mass-produced instant coffee. Then came 1938, and Nestlé's instant coffee, which sounds like it should be terrible but actually revolutionized coffee during World War II. Soldiers could have coffee anywhere, anytime. It wasn't gourmet, but it was caffeinated, and sometimes that's all you need. The real game changer was the automatic drip coffee maker, popularized by the Mr. Coffee machine in the early 1970s. Suddenly, anyone could make decent coffee at home without any skill or effort. Coffee went from being a craft to being a convenience. The 1960s through 1980s were dominated by what coffee experts call the second wave, mass-produced, heavily marketed coffee that prioritized convenience over quality. This was the era of Maxwell House, Folgers, and instant everything. Coffee became a commodity, like wheat or corn. Quality dropped as companies focused on consistent, cheap production. Dark roasts became popular partly because they masked the flavor of low-quality beans. The marketing was brilliant, good to the last drop, the best part of waking up, but the coffee itself was pretty mediocre. But something interesting was happening in coffee-growing regions. As global demand exploded, coffee farming expanded into marginal lands. Forests were cleared, traditional farming methods were abandoned in favor of high-yield varieties, and coffee agriculture became increasingly unsustainable. Then came the 1990s and what's known as the third wave of coffee. This started with a few companies like Peet's Coffee and Starbucks treating coffee like wine, emphasizing origin, processing methods, and brewing techniques. Howard Schultz visited Italy in 1983 and was amazed by espresso culture. He brought that vision back to America, and Starbucks exploded from a small Seattle company to a global empire. By the year 2000, there was a Starbucks on every corner, and terms like venti and frappuccino entered everyday vocabulary. But the third wave went beyond just Starbucks. Independent coffee roasters started focusing on single-origin beans, light roasts that highlighted flavor instead of masking it, and brewing methods that treated coffee like an artisanal craft. Baristas became skilled craftspeople, not just service workers. This movement also brought attention to coffee farmers. Fair trade certification started connecting consumers to the people who actually grew their coffee. For the first time in centuries, there was real discussion about whether coffee farmers were getting a fair deal. And that brings us to coffee's biggest challenge today: climate change. Coffee is incredibly sensitive to temperature and rainfall changes. Most coffee grows in a narrow band around the equator called the coffee belt, and that belt is shrinking. Rising temperatures are pushing coffee farms higher up mountains, but there's only so high you can go. Changing rainfall patterns are creating droughts in some regions and floods in others. New pests and diseases are thriving in the warmer climate. Here's the scary part. Some studies suggest that by 2050, the amount of land suitable for coffee production could be cut in half. Brazil, which produces about a third of the world's coffee, is already seeing yields drop in traditional growing regions. Coffee rust, a fungus that destroys coffee plants, has become a major crisis. In 2012 to 2013, coffee rust devastated Central American farms, destroying crops and forcing families to migrate. Climate change is making these outbreaks even more frequent and severe. And it's not just about having less coffee, it's about the human cost. There are about 25 million coffee farming families worldwide, mostly small-scale farmers who are incredibly vulnerable to climate change. When their crops fail, they have no safety net. The coffee industry's environmental footprint goes beyond just climate change. Traditional coffee farming was actually environmentally friendly. Coffee plants grew under forest canopies, preserving biodiversity and preventing soil erosion. But modern industrial coffee farming has changed that. Sun coffee plantations clear forests to grow coffee in full sunlight, which increases yields but destroys habitats and requires heavy pesticide use. The result is environmental degradation and loss of the bird species that traditionally helped control coffee pests naturally. Water usage is another huge issue. It takes about 140 liters of water to produce 1 cup of coffee when you account for growing, processing, and brewing. In regions already facing water scarcity, coffee production is competing with local communities for this vital resource. Coffee processing also creates significant waste. The pulp from coffee cherries, if not properly managed, can pollute waterways. Many small farms don't have the resources for proper waste management, creating environmental problems in coffee-growing regions. But the coffee industry is fighting back against these challenges in some pretty innovative ways. Scientists are developing climate-resistant coffee varieties that can handle higher temperatures and changing rainfall. They're breeding plants that maintain quality while being more resilient. Some of these new varieties are crosses between Arabica and Robusta species, combining Arabica's flavor with Robusta's toughness. There's even exciting research into Coffea stenophila, a lost species from West Africa that tastes like high-quality Arabica, but can grow in much warmer temperatures. Precision agriculture is helping farmers optimize their growing conditions. Satellite monitoring, soil sensors, and weather data are helping farmers make better decisions about when to plant, irrigate, and harvest. Technology that was once only available to large industrial farms is becoming accessible to small-scale producers. Agroforestry is making a comeback. Coffee companies are investing in shade-grown coffee programs that restore forest canopies while maintaining coffee production. These systems sequester carbon, preserve biodiversity, and often produce higher-quality coffee. The specialty coffee movement is also driving sustainability. Consumers are willing to pay premium prices for coffee that's grown sustainably and traded fairly. This creates economic incentives for farmers to adopt environmentally friendly practices. Some of the most promising solutions are coming from unexpected places. In Peru, coffee farmers are using ancient Incan agricultural techniques combined with modern science to create resilient farming systems. In Kenya, mobile phone technology is helping farmers access weather information, market prices, and agricultural advice. Coffee cooperatives are becoming more powerful, giving small farmers collective bargaining power and access to international markets. When farmers can capture more of the value chain, they have resources to invest in sustainable practices. Urban coffee production is even being explored. Vertical farms and controlled environment agriculture could potentially grow coffee in non-traditional locations, reducing transportation costs and environmental impact. The circular economy is also coming to coffee. Coffee grounds are being used for everything from biofuel to building materials. Companies are finding ways to turn coffee waste into valuable products, creating additional income streams for farmers and reducing environmental impact. The future of coffee might look very different from today. Lab-grown coffee is already being developed. Scientists can cultivate coffee cells in bioreactors without needing traditional farms. This could produce coffee with no environmental footprint, though whether it can replicate the complex flavors of traditional coffee remains to be seen. Blockchain technology is creating transparency in the coffee supply chain. Consumers can trace their coffee from farm to cup, knowing exactly where it was grown, how much the farmer was paid, and what environmental practices were used. Artificial intelligence is helping optimize everything from farming practices to roasting profiles. Machine learning can predict optimal harvest times, identify plant diseases early, and even help roasters develop new flavor profiles. But technology alone won't solve coffee's challenges. The industry needs systemic changes in how coffee is traded, priced, and valued. Farmers need to capture more of the value from their crops, and consumers need to understand the true cost of sustainable coffee production. So there you have it, the complete history of coffee, from ancient Ethiopian highlands to tomorrow's climate-adapted farms. It's a story that spans continents and millennia, involving everything from religious mysticism to global capitalism, from colonial exploitation to environmental crisis. What fascinates me most about coffee's story is how it mirrors human civilization itself. Coffee has been there for every major transformation: the rise of cities, the age of exploration, the Industrial Revolution, the Information Age, and now the climate crisis. It's not just that we drink coffee, coffee has literally shaped how we live, work, and organize society. But here's what gives me hope. Coffee's history shows that this crop and the people who grow it are incredibly resilient. Coffee has survived empire collapses, economic crashes, wars, and natural disasters. Every crisis has led to innovation, adaptation, and ultimately, better coffee. The climate crisis is real, and it's the biggest challenge coffee has ever faced. But when you look at coffee's history, I'm convinced that this industry will find ways to adapt, survive, and even thrive. It might require completely rethinking how we grow, process, and consume coffee, but that's happened before. The future of coffee depends on all of us: farmers who need support to adapt to climate change, companies that need to invest in sustainability, and consumers who need to understand that good coffee costs more than bad coffee, but it's worth it. So what surprised you most about coffee's incredible journey? Did the Ethiopian origins match what you expected? Were you shocked by coffee's role in political revolutions? And after learning about the climate challenges facing coffee today, are you ready to pay a bit more for sustainably grown beans? Let me know your thoughts in the comments and what aspect of coffee's history you found most interesting, or if there are specific coffee topics that you'd like me to explore in future videos. If you enjoyed this caffeinated journey through history, give this video a thumbs up and subscribe for more stories that connect the past to our present challenges. And one last thing, if you're interested in shorter stories from history, I publish content frequently on my other channel, Hoodie History Shorts. You can check it out now to discover all kinds of punchy stories from history. There's a link here and in the video description. Thanks for watching. Until next time, keep exploring the stories behind the things that we take for granted. And maybe, just maybe, savor that next cup of coffee just a little bit more.